Caitlin Clark has been in the WNBA for 3 seasons now.
You know, I usually stay out of these conversations, but with Caitlin Clark, I can't stay silent anymore.
And in that time, she has been struck harder, more often, and more visibly than almost anyone else on the floor. The numbers back this up. Since entering the league in 2024, Clark has drawn 9 flagrant fouls across 72 career games, the most of any player over that span. That works out to roughly 1 every 8 games she has played. The pattern has become impossible to ignore, both for the people who cover the league and for the people playing alongside her. What makes the statistic more striking is how it compares to everyone else. In that same stretch, only 4 other flagrant 2 fouls have been called across the entire league. One on Alyssa Thomas in 2024, one on Sophie Cunningham, one on Janelle Saloun, and one on Isabel Harrison. Each of those 4 resulted in an immediate ejection called in real time by officials on the floor. Clark's incidents have followed a different path. Twice in her last 25 games, the league office has acknowledged after the fact that contact against her should have resulted in an ejection, meaning the call was corrected only in hindsight, well after the game had already been decided. That gap between what happens in the moment and what gets acknowledged later has become the center of an ongoing conversation inside the league, and nobody has pushed that conversation harder than Clark's own teammate. Sophie Cunningham joined the Fever in 2025 after 6 seasons with the Phoenix Mercury, where she had been the 13th overall pick in the 2019 draft. Head coach Stephanie White has described her as a Swiss Army knife for the way she moves between roles depending on what the team needs. On the court this season, that has meant career-high 3-point shooting, hitting at 43.5% from beyond the arc while averaging 6 points per game. Off the ball, it has meant something else entirely, a self-appointed job policing the physicality directed at her teammate. The role predates this season. In June of 2025, during a game against the Connecticut Sun, Clark was shoved to the floor by Marina Mabrey following a tangle with JC Sheldon, who had poked Clark in the eye while contesting a drive. 1 quarter later, Cunningham grabbed Sheldon and threw her down during a layup attempt, setting off a brief brawl that got both players ejected. The incident split opinion across the league. Some argued Cunningham had gone too far. Others argued she had simply drawn a line that officials weren't drawing themselves. Either way, it cemented her reputation as the player standing between Clark and the rest of the WNBA. That reputation followed her into 2026. In June, during a game against the Phoenix Mercury at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Fever guard Sophie Cunningham confronted Phoenix's Dawana Bonner after Bonner went after Clark, ending the exchange with a pointed finger wag rather than physical contact. The Fever won that game 86-77. 2 days earlier, in a separate contest against Phoenix, Clark had fallen to the floor in the paint while Alyssa Thomas and Bonner both went for the loose ball. No foul was called on the play, and the Fever lost that game 111-109. The absence of a whistle on that sequence became part of a broader argument, voiced afterward by broadcaster Nancy DeMita, that the league has historically adjusted its rules around its biggest stars, pointing to how the NBA revisited hand-checking after the Detroit Pistons' physical defense against Michael Jordan in the late 1980s, and that the WNBA has yet to do the same for Clark. By late June, Cunningham stopped waiting for others to make that case and made it herself, directly, on her own podcast. She said the physicality happens to Clark every single game and argued that if the same treatment were directed at any other player on the roster, the team would react accordingly. She was blunt about where she placed the responsibility, stating plainly that the league and its officials do nothing to protect her teammate. The timing sharpened the criticism further. Around that same stretch, the WNBA released a 30th anniversary poster featuring 30 players across the league, and Clark was left off it entirely, despite having driven record ratings, attendance, and revenue growth since her arrival in 2024. The criticism didn't stay contained to Cunningham. ESPN commentator Stephen A. Smith weighed in shortly before her podcast comments went public, describing what he called a flagrant resentment toward Clark that has existed since she entered the league, framing her as the player generating the league's revenue while receiving the least protection in return. He warned that if the league didn't take the physical treatment more seriously, the risk of a serious injury would only grow, with consequences for the league's business as much as for Clark herself. For her part, Clark has not spent much time responding to the criticism in public. She has, however, been consistently vocal in praising Cunningham's role on the team. Speaking to reporters in April, Clark said what she appreciated most about Cunningham was that she was never intimidated by the moment, that she rose to the occasion every time, and that she would always have her teammates back. Cunningham has framed her own approach less as aggression for its own sake and more as team chemistry. She has pointed out that the WNBA is a hard league from top to bottom, regardless of where a team is ranked, and that a locker room built on players who visibly protect each other tends to hold together better than one that doesn't. That kind of unity, she has argued, gives a team confidence that outside noise won't be allowed to divide it. The tension between those two threads, Clark's growing commercial and competitive importance to the league, and the physical toll that importance seems to invite, has become one of the defining storylines of this Fever season. It shows up in box scores, in flagrant foul counts, in a poster that left off the league's most talked about player, and in a teammate willing to say publicly what officials have mostly avoided addressing directly. None of this exists in isolation from the broader arc of Clark's career. Her rookie season in 2024 ended with a 2-game sweep at the hands of the Connecticut Sun in the playoffs. Her second season in 2025 was cut short by injury, limiting her to just 13 games while she dealt with soft tissue issues in her groin and quad, along with a bone bruise in her ankle. She still finished that abbreviated stretch with All-Star and Rookie of the Year honors, along with a 4th-place finish in MVP voting, and was named Times Athlete of the Year for her impact on the sport beyond the box score. This season has been framed by many in the media as the one where postseason results finally need to match the hype, where the Fever, healthier and better built around her, are expected to contend rather than simply generate headlines. Whether that happens will depend on more than officiating calls. But the officiating question isn't going away, and Cunningham's insistence on raising it publicly has turned what might otherwise be a quiet frustration inside the locker room into an open, ongoing argument about how the league treats its most valuable player. Every hard foul that goes uncalled adds to a growing record that Cunningham and increasingly others around the league argue speaks for itself. What's notable is how consistent the pattern has become. It isn't one incident, or one game, or one especially physical opponent. It spans multiple seasons, multiple teams, and multiple officiating crews, which is part of why the flagrant foul numbers carry as much weight as they do. 9 flagrants in 72 games isn't an outlier data point. It's a rate, and it's the highest rate in the league over that stretch by a clear margin. When only 4 other flagrant 2 calls have been made against the rest of the league combined in that same window, and all 4 were caught live while 2 of Clark's most serious incidents were only acknowledged after review, the discrepancy becomes difficult to explain as coincidence. That's the argument Demita made when she invoked the NBA's own history with Jordan. The comparison isn't about talent or legacy, it's about how leagues have historically responded when a single player's treatment starts affecting competitive fairness and, eventually, safety. The NBA never officially credited any rule change to protecting one player, but the pattern was clear enough in hindsight that it became part of basketball history anyway. Demita's point was that the WNBA hasn't reached that same moment of acknowledgement yet, even as the underlying pattern with Clark has, by the numbers, become just as pronounced. Cunningham's role in all of this has evolved past simple team loyalty into something closer to an informal enforcement mechanism, filling a gap that official reffing hasn't closed. That's not a title assigned to her by the league or the team's front office. It's something she built through repeated, visible action, stepping between Clark and defenders, confronting players directly after hard fouls, and using post-game interviews and her own podcast platform to keep the issue in front of fans and media rather than letting it fade after each individual incident. Her willingness to do that consistently, across 2 full seasons now, is part of why her comments in June carried weight rather than reading as an isolated complaint. The business side of the story runs alongside all of this. Clark's presence has been directly tied to attendance figures, television ratings, and merchandise sales climbing across the league since her 2024 arrival, not just for the Fever, but for the WNBA as a whole. That context is part of why her exclusion from the 30th anniversary poster drew as much attention as it did. It read, to many observers, as strangely dissonant with everything else happening around her at the same time. A player driving unprecedented commercial growth, being left off a promotional campaign celebrating the league's history became its own small flashpoint layered on top of the officiating debate. Where this goes from here isn't settled. The Fever's season continues, Cunningham's public pressure campaign shows no sign of slowing, and the flagrant foul count will keep accumulating one game at a time. What has changed is that the conversation is no longer confined to fan message boards or post-game social media reaction. It has moved into locker room interviews, national broadcasts, and direct commentary from national media figures like Stephen A. Smith. Whether the league office responds with any formal change to how it reviews contact against Clark remains an open question. What isn't in question is the record building up around her, game by game, foul by foul, with her teammate making sure nobody forgets it. The Alyssa Thomas incident from earlier this season did as much to fuel the argument as anything Cunningham has said. During a loose ball scramble against Phoenix, Thomas struck Clark in the throat. Officials on the floor initially ruled it a non-flagrant foul and let play continue. Clark left that game with a back injury and missed the Fever's final contest before the Commissioner's Cup break. It was only after the league office reviewed the play separately that the call was upgraded to a flagrant 2, and Thomas was suspended for 1 game. Fever head coach Stephanie White called the way Clark had been officiated on that play absolutely unacceptable. WNBA legend Lisa Leslie echoed the sentiment publicly, saying the league needed to do better. Mercury coach Nate Tibbetts pushed back from the other side, arguing the league hadn't conducted a thorough enough investigation before handing down the suspension. Clark addressed the aftermath directly, without naming Thomas, drawing a line between competitive physicality and harassment. She said that any hate or harassment aimed at players, whether from opposing fans or otherwise, was unacceptable, and that the standard applied equally to her own teammates and coaches. It was a notably restrained response given the circumstances, and it stood in contrast to the noise building around her on talk shows and social media. That same week produced one of the more widely discussed officiating moments of the season. During the Fever's 86-77 win over the Mercury, Clark was given a technical foul for clapping her hands after being whistled for a personal foul. She confirmed the explanation herself afterward, saying she'd asked the referee directly why she'd been flagged and was told it was for clapping. Her response to reporters was pointed. She suggested the league might as well schedule in advance which game she'd eventually be suspended for, given how easily technicals were accumulating. The moment became a flashpoint precisely because it illustrated the inconsistency players and coaches had been describing all season. A real safety incident drawing an initial no call, while a clap drew an immediate technical. The broader statistics support the sense that officiating has been unsteady across the league, not just around Clark. The 2026 season opened with 22.3 fouls and 23.1 free throws per game, a sharp jump from 17.5 fouls and 18.2 free throws the year before. A report from The Athletic found coaches and general managers from 8 different teams in agreement that officiating quality remained subpar. Despite the league forming a dedicated task force the previous offseason that included head coaches Stephanie White, Cheryl Reeve, and Becky Hammon, and despite hiring veteran official Eric Bruton as a referee performance advisor. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had promised during All-Star Weekend in July of 2025 that the league would address the problem. Other incidents this season, including 3 incorrect calls acknowledged after a Chicago Sky loss and a case where officials failed to notice Fever guard Kelsey Mitchell had already fouled out, kept the pressure on the league's credibility. Atlanta's Jordan Canada was even more direct after one loss, calling the officiating awful and saying a referee had personally admitted to her that a call was missed. Clark's own comments have increasingly echoed that structural complaint rather than a personal one, calling for the league to move toward full-time officials and arguing that better consistency was necessary to protect players across the board, not just her. Taken together with Cunningham's ongoing advocacy, the throat incident, the technical foul controversy, and the league's own acknowledgement that its task force hasn't yet solved the problem, the picture that emerges is one of a systemic issue that happens to be most visible whenever it involves the league's most watched player.